Hello and welcome, fellow bookworms and film fans. Welcome to this week's episode of The Contented Narrative. Don't forget to click subscribe and like the videos, then you'll be alerted whenever a new one becomes available. So this week's episode, we'll be looking at this very pretty, gorgeous version of Wuthering Heights. Now, just before we sort of jump into that, if anybody sort of saw anything that I got over my birthday, I'm sure you will have seen that a beautiful cake maker in Leeds called Jodie. It's called Jodie Bakes on Facebook. She made the most amazing Wuthering Heights birthday cake I think I have ever seen and ever tasted. It didn't last very long because I cut it up into slices and had quite a few each day, but definitely she is amazing and it was worth it. So anyway, Wuthering Heights was obviously written by Emily Bronte. It was written under the pseudonym though of Ellis Bell. It was published in 1847 and it has since been adapted quite multiple of times. The version I will be looking at, however, is the 2009 version starring Tom Hardy. And as always, we will be looking at three things. How good is the book? How good is the film? And of course, how well does the plot take from the book? So let's start with the film. So, Tom Hardy, I mean, I love him as an actor. He's just brilliant. One of my favourite films with him in it is called Legend, where he plays both Grey brothers. Honestly, I adore him. And it is amazing. I watched this version very first time in secondary school at Kidbrooke. Shout out to anyone who who knows Kidbrooke or remembers Kidbrooke Secondary School, while studying Wuthering Heights as the book. Now, back then, I was smitten. I was swooning and smitten for Heathcliff. I'm not going to lie. I 100% was. Pretty much every single teenage girl probably was. I love how much he loved Catherine, how he went out of his way to be with her, you know, and vice versa. And it's such a tragic, gothic love story. Then I grew up. That's all I've got to say for that. So basically, as I got older, and I've rewatched it the other month, I realised that pretty much that everyone that comes from the place, Wuthering Heights, Catherine, Hindley, Heathcliff, are all very toxic people. They're very toxic individuals that honestly decide to destroy each other's lives and destroy so many lives, not just each other's lives, but like the lives of their children, of their nephews, of their nieces, of like, it's just insane how many lives they destroy. Just because Heathcliff wants to be with Catherine, Catherine decides that maybe she is better off with somebody else. Heathcliff disappears off for 3 years, comes back. Catherine's obviously married to someone else, can't wait for if Heathcliff will ever come back. So then Heathcliff goes about basically destroying everything that Catherine has built. And I mean, it's still a fantastic, fantastic adaptation. And honestly, I thoroughly enjoy it, but I feel like I enjoy it more as an adult, being like, you're toxic, like, what are you playing at? So it is quite fun to watch. And honestly, it gets a 7 out of 10 for me. Now, obviously, I say film, but I know it's a BBC miniseries. It's a 2-part miniseries. So for the purposes of this book to film adaptation, I will be saying film. But obviously, rest assured that I am aware it is a miniseries. I just can't be bothered to say it every single time. So, the book. Now, this book, despite obviously being grown up and rereading it again, it's still such a brilliant novel to read. It honestly is. However, as I said, with the film, I find that if you read it as you get older, you see more distinct issues with the main characters than you do when you're younger. It's still sort of a gothic love story. I still love the backdrop. I love the characters, despite how toxic they are. But they are very manipulative. I mean, Heathcliff is manipulative. He's petty. He's childish. He's vindictive. Catherine's no better. You know, I mean, I feel sorry for the Lintons because both, you know, the son and the daughter, Edgar and Isabel, they both get completely, like, Edgar ends up with Catherine, Isabel ends up with Heathcliff. They both have miserable lives because of, you know, because of people that come from Wuthering Heights. So, you know, Catherine is very petulant as well, and she's very cruel. I feel like it's a lot more obvious in the book how cruel she really is. In the film, she's kind of a bit more of a heroine, but she is cruel. She is, with how she treats those around her. In fact, every single character has their flaws. And yet somehow this makes the story so much more spellbinding. As you watch these people interact with each other and realize that they're ruining each other's lives, and for what? So it's really good. I mean, I used to believe that it was a full-on gothic, tragic love story, and it still is in part a bit. But I feel like it's so much more when you read it when you're older. It's so much more looking at, you know, the intricacies of small areas, and like when you grow up believing you're going to marry one person because that's what it was back then, and then when you don't end up with that person, it can destroy you. And also looking at the different classes and looking at adoption and things like that. And it's honestly, it's absolutely fantastic. And I urge anyone who has not read it, anyone who is trying to read it, persevere. Honestly, it's such a good book, and it gets an 8 out of 10 for me. So let's start with the plot. So the plot. The book starts with Mr. Lockwood meeting his landlord Heathcliff at Wuthering Heights. Mr. Lockwood never shows up in the film. We never have this Mr. Lockwood character. So you've got two main dwellings in the book and the film. You've got Thrushcross Grange, which is known as the Grange, and Wuthering Heights, which is known as just Heights. So if I say Heights or the Grange, you know what I'm talking about. So the book starts with Mr. Lockwood meeting with his landlord Heathcliff at the Heights about the dwelling, the Grange. The film, however, starts with Mr. Linton moving his nephew back in with his father, who is Heathcliff. So in the book, when Lockwood comes back, he's gone to Heights. He's met with Heathcliff. He finally makes it back to the Grange, and he's met by a woman. This time, who is Heathcliff's daughter-in-law, Catherine. Sorry, he's still at the Heights, and he meets this woman who is Heathcliff's daughter-in-law, I call her Kathy, because Catherine's the older version, Kathy's her daughter. She's very disagreeable. She's not a very nice human being. And he meets a young man who is rough around the edges and who is also very disagreeable, who is Hurton Earnshaw. And Hurton is Kathy's cousin, because Hurton is Catherine's brother's son. Okay? So, I mean, there's a little family tree in the front of the book anyway. So you then find out as well that Kathy was married to Heathcliff's son, but unfortunately Heathcliff's son has passed away. Now, in the film, Kathy goes out exploring after obviously her cousin has been taken away, and comes across Heathcliff, who takes her to her cousin, and slowly Heathcliff pushes the two together to marry, as he would then own everything that Linton has, and everything, because when his son passes, Linton is going to leave everything to Heathcliff in his will. And when he does that, when Kathy marries Linton, when Linton passes away, Heathcliff will then also own the Grange and everything that Edgar used to own. So in the book, Lockwood is then stranded at Wuthering Heights due to a huge snowstorm and ends up staying in Catherine's old room. Catherine's old room. And he ends up reading extracts about her past, but not much information, just little extracts here and there. The film at this point has cut back to Heathcliff arriving at Wuthering Heights as a small boy, and being introduced to the family. There is only Mr. Earnshaw, Hindley, and Catherine and the servants in the film, but in the book as well, you have Catherine's mum. But Catherine's mum, for some reason, is very, very, like, she's mentioned a couple of times and then she just disappears off the face of the earth. We don't know what happens to her. Hindley hates him straight away. So Hindley hates Heathcliff from the very beginning. Catherine starts off hating him, but then ends up sort of like growing to like him. So in the book, Lockwood comes across the spirit of Catherine trying to get in. In the film, you see this with Heathcliff a little bit towards the end of the film. So when Lockwood wakes the next day, he goes back to the Grange, and from Ellen, now she's called Ellen and Nellie, but I'm just going to call her Ellen. So if I'm referring to Ellen, we know who I'm talking about. And he learns of the history of the Heights, and Heathcliff and Catherine and everything in between. So in the book, Ellen tells of Heathcliff's arrival, in which Mr. Earnshaw has a wife, which disappears off the face of the earth. So in both, Hindley is then shipped off to boarding school to become a proper upstanding person of society. And Catherine and Heathcliff then become inseparable because Hindley was the bad influence on Catherine to make her dislike Heathcliff. So Mr. Earnshaw in the book seems a harder character, like a little bit harder to love. And he ails a lot quicker as well, and he dies a lot quicker while they're still quite young. In the film, he dotes on them a lot more, and he doesn't die until they're quite a bit older. So anyway, in both, Hindley returns to the estate and brings back a wife with him. Once the father has passed away, once Mr. Earnshaw has passed away. He then orders the servants to be more in the background. He then orders Heathcliff to become one of the servants, and he keeps Heathcliff working outdoors. Now, in both, on one of their jaunts, Catherine ends up injured by having a dog bite her ankle, so she ends up having to stay at the Grange with the Lintons. This proves to be the beginning of a wedge between her and Heathcliff. Heathcliff ends up back at the Heights. So I will say as well, in the book, it covers a larger period of time. We see them as younger, quite a lot longer, and then we see them grow up. The film seems a lot more quick with how quickly we see them grow. So anyway, in both, Catherine is staying at the Grange for 5 weeks, and then when she returns with more poise and grace than she had when she was going to the Grange. And again, this causes even a bigger wedge between her and Heathcliff, because she now sees herself as more of a lady, and he misses the wild woman that he knew. So anyway, in both, Catherine, who has got to know Edgar and Isabella, invites them round for Christmas tea. And as they're invited round, Heathcliff causes some unrest, which causes Hindley to then beat him, which sours the mood for everyone. So Heathcliff now has made it his mission to destroy Hindley, no matter how long it takes, no matter what it takes. He will own everything Hindley has, and he will destroy Hindley. So in both, Hindley's wife gives birth to his son Hareton. In the book, she passes away after a week. In the film, it's the same night. However, in both, it drives Hindley to not pay attention to his son and to start his slow descent into alcoholism. So he's now given, the raising of his son to Ellen. He wants nothing to do with the son. He doesn't care. He's now becoming an alcoholic. So Catherine, meanwhile, is becoming closer with Edgar and still trying to be close to Heathcliff, but it's not quite working because they're two completely different people. However, Edgar asks for Catherine's hand in marriage. This finishes off the wedge between Heathcliff and Catherine, and it causes irreparable damage. So Heathcliff then decides to leave to find his fortune, and he's gone for 3 years, and Catherine then marries Edgar. So in the book, after Heathcliff leaves, Catherine falls ill with a fever, which then unfortunately also kills Edgar's parents, who we don't really see in the film. But in both, it's after 3 years that Catherine and Edgar finally do tie the knot and finally get married. Woo, happy day. And in the book as well, we do keep popping back to Ellen talking to Lockwood and telling him the history, as Lockwood's trying to get better from being ill, basically. So anyway, in the film, Heathcliff comes back on Catherine's wedding day. Doesn't do anything drastic like running down the aisle and saying, "Oh, don't marry him." So, he runs off comes back on Catherine's wedding day. But in the book, it's a few months after Catherine's wedding day. However, in both, he asks Ellen to let Catherine know that he has returned, which then sees him enter the Grange as a visitor, much to the pleasure of Catherine and the displeasure of Edgar, because Heathcliff has now become quite rich, quite well-to-do, and has had a few manners taught to him. So in both, Heathcliff ends up lodging at the Heights as he comes across Hindley, who's being cheated out of money because he's gambling and he's alcoholic and he's drunk and he's basically, drinking his life away. And also in both, Isabella starts with a little bit of a crush for Heathcliff, which causes Catherine to become very peevish and nasty to Isabella. Like, she's as I said before, she's a churlish child. Try saying that 10 times fast. So in fact, when Heathcliff comes to the Grange, Catherine shows Isabella up in front of him to embarrass her even further. And also in both, we learn that Hindley is slowly selling his land and everything to Heathcliff because he needs the money. So Heathcliff then decides to court Isabella, as it would vex Catherine and Edgar more, because more than... So he doesn't love Isabella. He's courting Isabella because he knows that it'll annoy Catherine, because Catherine wants Heathcliff to herself, but Catherine's married to Edgar. But he also knows that by being with Isabella, it'll annoy Edgar as well. So it's two birds, one stone, really. This whips Edgar into a frenzy, and then he insists that Catherine choose either to keep being his wife or to keep her acquaintance with Heathcliff. Cannot have both. And if she keeps Heathcliff, she'll be banished from the Grange, as simple as that. So in the book, after the ultimatum is given, Catherine falls seriously ill. In the film, however, she confesses that she's pregnant. So both reasons as to why she can't leave the Grange. But in both, however, Isabella has run off to be with Heathcliff. So Edgar now disowns her completely. So in the book, after Catherine recovers from her illness, we then learn that she's pregnant. So she falls ill, then we learn she's pregnant. In the film, we learn she's pregnant, and then she falls ill later. But in both, the bliss of being married to Heathcliff soon disappears from Isabella's eyes. The rose-tinted glasses have definitely fallen off. There was no honeymoon period. As she realises that he does not love her, Wuthering Heights is a dismal place to live, and that he only can think of Catherine. So in both, Hindley has now lost everything to Heathcliff. So he warns Isabella when they move back in that she needs to lock the door every night, because if one night he goes up there and that door's open, he will kill her and he will kill Heathcliff, because he hates Heathcliff, like with every fibre of his being, because Heathcliff is destroying him, as he promised earlier in the book. He's nothing if not consistent as Heathcliff. One thing is sure, however, Heathcliff and Catherine have such strong feelings for each other. I don't know, I wouldn't say love, that's why I said strong feelings. They get possessiveness, and they get churlish, and you know, they're very childish, so they're strong feelings, whatever the feelings are. But only Heathcliff is fully unhappy with his marriage. Catherine does have some feelings of affection for Edgar, so she's not all bad. So Heathcliff comes to visit Catherine, as he is aware that she's very ill. He holds her and he relents to leave only once Edgar has taken her in his arms and will promise to not leave Catherine's side. So that night, Cathy is born, and Catherine unfortunately passes away. So the passing of Catherine causes such distress in both Edgar and Heathcliff. Isabella at this point has decided to run away from Heathcliff, pregnant with his son, but will make sure that he never sees them. Hindley then passes on, barely a year after Catherine, which leaves Heathcliff completely in charge up at Wuthering Heights. Isabella passes on. I didn't realise how many people die, to be perfectly honest, pretty much all the main cast. Isabella then dies and hands Linton, who's her and Heathcliff's son, over to her brother Edgar's care, which is how Cathy comes to meet him and how she grows affection for him. So in the book, Cathy comes across Wuthering Heights alone when Heathcliff and Joseph are not around, and then she gets to know her cousin Hareton. In the film, she only comes across Wuthering Heights when Heathcliff brings her there to find that her cousin Linton is there. But as I said before, this happens at the start of the book. In both, however, Heathcliff is aware that he has a son, and he's aware that his son will not last long because his son will die. So he needs to find a way to have the Linton's estate. So this is why he pushes to get Cathy to marry Linton before Linton dies. At this point in the book as well, Heathcliff reacquaints Cathy with Linton, as he wants them to marry so he can truly own everything. And in the book, we read more about the correspondence between Linton and Cathy, and Linton as well in the book seems a lot more childish and petty, and Catherine more obstinate than you see in the film. In the film, they seem a lot more happy and, you know, well, like children, basically. But Catherine's secret meetings continue in both. So she continues to go see Linton despite being told don't go to the Heights. So in the book, Edgar learns of Cathy's visits to Linton, but slowly allows the two to meet again, as his health is in decline and he doesn't want his daughter to be unhappy. But in both, so you see what I mean? Like Edgar, even though he hates the Heights, even though he hates Heathcliff, even though all of his misery comes from there, he still doesn't want his daughter to be unhappy, so he still lets her go off to the Heights. However, Heathcliff, he doesn't disappoint. He locks Cathy and Nellie in Wuthering Heights until Cathy marries Linton, and then Linton passes on. And it works. So in both, Cathy gets back to the Grange just in time to say goodbye to her dad before he passes away. Then she ends up back at Wuthering Heights in utter misery for a lot longer period of time in the book than it is in the film. In both, Heathcliff opens Catherine's grave and pretty much sleeps in her dead embrace, which is a little bit creepy, but he really wants to be close to her. Linton then passes away, which leaves Kathy destitute and Heathcliff owner of everything. And in the book, Kathy is vile to Hareton because she's miserable, he belittles him out of spite for how she's ended up. And in the film, after Linton's death, they seem to draw closer. So in the book, they move apart before they draw closer, but in the film, they draw closer straight away. So in the book, Lockwood decides against staying longer at the Grange and so leaves, and he doesn't return towards the end of the year. And when he returns at the end of the year, he hears that Heathcliff has died. So Heathcliff has committed suicide in both, because otherwise he will live forever. So Kathy is now seeming nicer to Hareton because Nellie is now back at Wuthering Heights and basically telling her to behave herself. And in the book, Heathcliff's descended into madness. I mean, to be fair, I say in the book, he descends into madness in the film as well. But in the book, in the film, he sort of like descends into madness and then kills himself in Catherine's old room. In the book, it's a lot longer, where he neither eats nor drinks and he keeps strange hours and he has a weird joy at one point and then he's just found dead. Simple as that. So the book ends with Kathy and Hareton ending up together. They leave Wuthering Heights and move back to the Grange. The film ends the same way, but it's never explicitly implied that they move back to the Grange, just that they end up together and they leave. So the two narratives, once they get going, are very, very similar. Now, obviously, we have Lockwood as the narrator in the book, and we don't ever see that in the film. And also, the book takes place over a much wider period of time than the film does. The overall narrative, however, of the film does take in quite a lot from the book. It kind of begins the same, has pretty much the same middle and a bit of the same end. So overall, I'll give it a 6 out of 10 for the plot. Now, obviously, this is my own opinion. If you agree or disagree with anything that I say, please do leave it below in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to always keep it contento.